programmatic ad campaigns. So that was interesting because I had gone from any variety of mediums and any crazy size down to a 300 by 250 square.
Welcome to the IKAG podcast, powered by Meticulous Image. In this episode, we have a special guest, Cristy Hatter, the VP of Brand for Lectric E-Bikes. Cristy has a wealth of experience in brand management and consulting, having worked with companies such as Solostove, Multiview, Texas Tech University, and more. She has also led digital marketing, social media, and customer service teams. She has a talent for developing sustainable, effective brand strategies. Cristy will share her insights and experience with us today, so tune in for a fascinating conversation on branding and growth in the electric bike industry. How was that?
Real good.
I have an admission to make.
The first mention of Lectric didn't say e-bikes, but other than that, good.
Well,
do you want feedback right now?
No. The good news. No, the good news is with that criticism, is I did not write that.
Oh, okay.
Chat GPT wrote that.
Oh.
Have you been tinkering with this Chat GPT thing?
Yes.
What are your thoughts as somebody who is creative and somebody who has to use sort of modern means of technology to define businesses and brands? And where's your head at in this AI world that is approaching? Maybe it's already here. I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely already here. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it's going to take off and grow like crazy. I mean, AI's been in the mix, but with all these new tools now available to everyone to test and learn and play with, I think it'll just, become something like a calculator. Those were seen as crazy back in the day. Couldn't take them into class, right? But now it's kind of like a normal part of life. I think there's a lot of room for tools like ChatGPT to make our lives easier, and then we can think about other things. But certainly there's a downside.
Now you have over the years that you've done what you have, accomplished with developing brands and creating campaigns. You probably have quite a bit of experience with the technology behind powering these brands and campaigns. Talk to me a little bit about that and what you have witnessed in the evolution of that. I mean, at one, you worked for Multiview, which is online digital publisher, and they have quite a bit of technology in the world of, we'll say, programmatic advertising and things of that nature. Your job, and correct me if I'm wrong, was to sort of foster businesses utilizing these platforms. And talk to me a little about define this technology and yeah.
So, do you want how technology has changed over the years, or do you want how people are using technology in marketing today?
I think your insight would be fantastic in how it has changed over the years, to the point where, I just wrote up a decent paragraph. I understand it was a little bit lacking, but the computers aren't amazing at everything yet. But yeah, let me just hear about what you have observed in technology and the fostering of brands.
Yeah. So I think it's always been something where, you would use the tools that were available to you. And, at different points in time, there have been different tools available. So you might have a cardboard and a marker and your, 8-megapixel camera.
Is that where you started?
At one point.
This
Yeah.
is where you start. You're speaking from experience.
And before that, there was just things that were done just by hand. And so I think as you've had more tools available, you use more tools. All the different variations of Photoshop and Illustrator came about, and over the years, each new version would have a little bit cooler thing and a little bit cooler thing and a little bit cooler thing. So for me, it's always been about finding the efficiencies, with the tools. A lot of technologies that have been introduced, I think, initially when they come out, it's like technology for technology's sake in the beginning, I feel like, and you just have the ability to do this thing or make this sound or make this cool effect in your video. And so you do because you can, not necessarily because it's the best way to get your idea across.
The novelty factor.
And so then, after it's out for a while, then you're like, okay, well, this is actually what's working, with this thing. Or maybe this thing isn't working at all. It's just making it noisy. So I think there's that process of a thing comes out and you play with it and then you tweak it and then you land on something that's usable.
On the subject of developing tools and getting experience from that, how did you wind up in the world, the industry, this section of the industry that you are currently in? What was your journey like?
Well, I started out as a t-shirt designer, so I knew Photoshop and Illustrator. I did not have my degree, and I was just like, I had a cleaning business at the time. I was 19, a very successful cleaning business, and I had several clients and several employees.
Cleaning offices?
Nope, houses. And I was 19, and I had my first year in business, and I was like faced with a very terrible reality of having to pay taxes, which I had no understanding of at the time. So I'm like, all right, I need to either make this a legitimate business and go into cleaning full-time or follow my passion, which was art. So I was like, all right, here we go. And I applied for the job with my 2 classes in my terrible portfolio. And it went from there. So I just started making t-shirt art. I had a great boss. He was from Chile, very entrepreneurial, and he would just guide me along the way. Like, that doesn't look good, that doesn't look good. And he was over my shoulder for probably the first 5 years of my career designing. And I eventually just got the hang of what looks good. And I think things really started to take off late 2000s. I was leading a team. I had this really great design for Texas Tech versus Texas game, 2008. And it just blew up. There was 10,000 units sold. And half the stadium, on ESPN was in a shirt that I had designed. And that really kind of felt like a defining moment for me.
No kidding.
So, but interestingly, after that point, I kind of stopped creating and I just started guiding people more. Took more of a director role and did all kinds of crazy new startups and, eventually ended up in the grocery space and then at Multiview, moved to Dallas and did programmatic ad campaigns. So that was interesting because I had gone from any variety of mediums and any crazy size down to a 300 by 250 square. And so that was cool to really refine my skill set. And
did you find that limiting? Or did you find it challenging?
Well, I went there on purpose because at that point I had a lot of experience in the tangible mediums in print and T-shirts and things like that. And I didn't have a lot of digital. So I really got a great opportunity there to learn digital marketing. And so I learned pretty much everything digital there, social and video and, anything and everything I wanted to. Ad server, tech, all the nuts and bolts of how things work when you show someone a tiny little picture on their screen as they're looking at something else. So, and then how do you be effective in that, right? How do you capture someone's attention when they're doing something else and you want to invade their space with a tiny little thing that says, hey, look at me? How do you make your brand memorable? And so, I learned a lot about how to capture someone's attention, how to whittle it down to really what's the most effective and most simple way to say something and convey an idea. And went from there into Solo Stove, where I helped, really a very successful brand at that point, just become even more successful. And then now with Lectric E-Bikes. So Lectric is technically my 10th startup. So yeah, I kind of like the fast pace. I love the young team. And that space is really just growing like crazy. So it's a lot of fun.
From entrepreneurship kicking off in a house cleaning
to e-bikes.
To e-bikes. Wow. That is such in everything in between, from football teams to grocery stores to online digital publication. And what is it that you really like about it? Now, I understand that what you have done is there's a wide variety, from T-shirts to e-bikes, but there's got to be something at that really just sort of,
Well, selfishly,
money.
Well,
yeah, of course.
That's why we go to work. But selfishly, it's actually just having the opportunity to help a business grow, to have someone hear my ideas and listen to me and take them and be more effective in what they do. That brings me joy. So.
Well, having fostered, 10 startups, I mean, clearly that's something you really enjoy. And I guess the niche section that you're in is how you best do it. And that's, so it's fulfilling.
I think startups work for me because, once a business is fairly established and out there and well known, they have less problems. So I like problems, and I'm good at solving problems, and I'm good at taking a brand that's not as well known and getting them more well known, putting processes in place, building teams, so some of that setup phase is my strength, more so than I would say the sustaining phase.
Let's talk about teams, working with others, working with creatives, working with creatives, having to work with those perhaps in sort of the more technical space, such as the case would be with like programmatic advertising and creating campaigns for that. What do you gravitate towards with this challenge? What do you love about it? So many creative people sometimes don't like working with others, but here you are, and that's okay. That's fine. Some people are sort of like a lone wolf type, and they're able to create their very own unique vision with very competently without the help of others. However, you have gravitated towards building teams, and I'm sure there's a level of communication that is incredibly important for that. But what do you like about it? What are the challenges?
Yeah, so I think the team varies based on the type of business. So if we're talking about an agency setting, the needs of a team are very different than an in-house team. So, when I was at Multiview, for example, in the agency world, that was, a situation where you did need really a bunch of high performing individual contributors, because they were trained to receive a new client, crank out work for them. Mm-hmm. And that was an environment where you really wanted to focus in on morale, and, keeping everybody positive about, taking that next call and doing that next thing. And it could help in that environment to structure teams based on their competencies. So if there were some that were better at, say, taking on a new client, and others that were better at kind of executing on the work that's already created, implementing, production artists and things like that into teams can help divvy up the work. My strategy with in-house teams is generally to have at least one point of redundancy. So what's challenging when a business becomes very successful is when you only have one person that can do a particular task. So whenever you're working with a team, you want to try to find a way to hire someone who can back them up. And there's a lot of overlapping skill sets within marketing. So sometimes you can find that redundancy within, even another job title. So you want to have your kind of lead say graphic designer and then have someone else who can back them up. So a lot of what I end up doing is creating that point of redundancy, because then you can say when you will get something done instead of saying, no, I can't do that, right? So if you only have one person and that person is, completely bogged down, then you don't have any, release valve. So I think it's important to have that point of redundancy where you can, go, okay, well, you're busy, let's have this other person do that task. And that's where the communication really comes in. I think the best ideas come from the teams. I've learned that the older I get, the more my ideas suck. So I think it's important to have really fresh, minds in the space.
Steve Jobs had a quote that was like, no one makes anything cool after 30, I think is something. Do you think that's true? I'm 35.
Well, I've just been reading this book, actually, and creative careers tend to peak out after 15 years. So maybe.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily your age, but how long you have been dealing in that space.
Exactly. So when you get to this point where the book describes it as sort of fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. So you basically go from like creating, innovating into more of a teaching, guiding. And so you want to try to craft your career in a way where you can flow into that.
What is this book called?
From something to something.
Okay.
Strength to strength. From strength to
From
strength.
strength to strength. Okay. In my fountain pen. You got one of these from us, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I did. Thank you.
I love fountain pens. But they don't always, why is this technology not used anymore? We'll put a little tag in the bottom of it, from strength to strength. It sounds like a really interesting read. And
It was very helpful for me just to kind of give myself a little grace. But yeah, I think it's important to recognize your own strengths and recognize where you need augmentation,
How do you hit the target that is demanded by your clientele, by a brand? You mentioned sort of redundancy in terms of your team, so that deadlines, and I'm a big proponent of redundancy within, we'll say, filmmaking, for instance, or video production. I think that's what separates, the men from the boys. Those, yeah. But what other sort of, how do you go about making sure that you hit your mark for those that ask of you to kick ass?
Yeah. So I think it helps to be involved in goal creation, to start with. And if you're involved in that conversation, then you can kind of weigh in ways that you can execute on, or ask for support resources, if you can't. But then once it comes to the team, I am such a big proponent of planning. So a regular planning meeting cadence, once a month with key stakeholders in the business to do marketing planning. So someone from accounting is there, someone from ops is there, CEO is there, key people from marketing deciding, okay, what are our marketing activities going to be? And we're talking about those activities, there's an annual meeting, and then every month there's either a quarter or the next 3 months, and a quarter discussed. So that when you've gotten to the month that you're in, you've now talked about it with leadership 2 to 3 times. And then, those monthly meetings feed into weekly meetings with the marketing team. I may be going into too much detail here, but this is how the magic happens, in my opinion. Weekly meetings about what the content plan is. What email are we sending out on Monday, and what's that going to happen at? What's primary, secondary? Which audience segments are getting that email? How does that work on social with email? How does that work on other platforms? And really, once you've got that plan, now you can go back and create the content to fit the plan. So you know that you need at least 2 months, really, for most campaigns, to get it put together and things. So you just kind of need to start that engine up and say, all right, our first one's going to be 2 months from now, and then the following week we're going to have another one. So that means we're creating, and then the team really gets trained around meeting those deadlines further and further out, and you kind of have your day-to-day work going so that when the last-minute things come up, you have bandwidth to do it. What really kills, being able to meet deadlines is when everything's a fire, right? When everything's last minute. So you kind of have to have that ongoing work taking up about 70% of the bandwidth so that you do have that 30% available for the last minute stuff, and just building that in as an expectation of like there's always going to be something last minute. So when the team is trained in that sort of yes environment, you can pretty much hit your deadlines.
I love the engine metaphor.
Yeah.
And how many, 10 startups, I'm sure, is each one of those an engine, or within that startup and that journey, are there multiple engines? Is each sort of campaign, and is that an engine? How many engines are there?
Good question.
That are built, serve their purpose, and then shut down again, and then the next one is built? Or is it all one big engine? I don't know.
Yeah, good question. I think that each startups come in all different stages, right? So it kind of depends on if we're truly at it, no one knows about this yet, or if we've been out for a few years and we just need some traction, so it kind of depends on what you need. But essentially you need, we were speaking about, brand media specifically, but there's a need to get eyeballs to the site, which is usually your PR, your advertising, your influencer marketing, that kind of thing gets eyeballs to the site. Once it gets to the site, then we got to say, okay, what's there? Is that good? So there's usually like an engine that optimizes what's on the site, right? Does this work on this part of the page, and will people click on that if it's that color or that color, right? So you're optimizing the page. And then, once they've experienced the product or the item, there's sort of an engine that goes, okay, what makes people want to keep using it and talking about it? So there's all these different components of the product that then marketing kind of comes on top of, and brand comes on top of and says, okay, well, let me give you some creatives to get eyeballs to the site. Let me give you some assets that make the site look nice. Let me give you some tools or some guides or some videos that help you understand how to use the product better, than make you want to go out on social and share about it, or share it with your friends, or take it on a trip, right? Mm-hmm. So it's all those little parts and pieces need to be considered, and really brand is just supporting those engines. And so that's kind of how I think the brand engine plays into the other things. Gotcha. Like website, like advertising, and like, product performance.
Just a few minutes ago, you mentioned something that I think is sort of an inherent scenario, and that is towards the end of a project, towards the end of, we'll say, an engine's purpose or life, there is, hopefully not, but there is sort of an element of, I guess I'll call it chaos, perhaps, maybe some fires that need to be tended to. Do you feel in your line of work that is always the case? Like, it always seems, even if the house isn't burning down, there is always, like, when you're in the thick of it and you're in the that there's always perhaps a feeling of chaos. I don't, because when we're on set, we have no idea what's going on. No, there's always like a feeling for me when I'm directing or producing and we are in the thick of it. It's not necessarily chaos, but maybe for filmmaking and being on set with your boots on the ground, making things happen, the adrenaline is so high that you might feel that there are fires that need to be put out. But the truth of the matter is that you've built this machine and worked on this machine so many times that the truth of the matter is that everything is in perfect control, and I don't know.
I think it's all chaos.
Okay.
I don't think when we do something, like we make a picture, we make a video, we go, I'm going to pick that piece. Right? And then you go, okay, and like out of all the chaos, I just made that thing. And now you have to look at that thing because I made that thing. Right? Yeah. So it's just like a matter of what you choose out of the chaos. And so I think when you make any creative work, it starts with, say, a photo shoot, and, of all the possibilities of poses and motions and facial expressions and things that could have been captured, that set of images that you get are the things that were captured out of the chaos. And it could be that none of them work. It could be that none of them work with your vision. And so then what do? You go, okay, well, I have to get this done. So you modify your vision a bit, and you work with what you have. So I think the ability to move forward and come to a final presentation of creative is something that can be debilitating, for some, especially if the process leading up to it, good, floating things.
Feather.
Yeah, if the process leading up to what, the assets you have to work with isn't exactly what you envisioned, then it can feel like, how am I going to do this, right? And so I think it's a constant adaptation of chaos.
So here's a huge question with the chaos question, because I recognize that anytime we're creating, at least in my video world, in my niche area of the industry and sort of marketing and advertising, I recognize that there always is chaos. Sometimes we'll call them overlords, observe from the outside, are like, what is going on, right? Perhaps they are not as used to the creative methods that are used to create, marketing, advertising, or foster any sort of media for a brand or anything like that. How do you work with clientele that perhaps are not as used to that process and what that looks like? And how do you get them to the point where out of the chaos comes a fantastic, amazing piece of content, ad campaign, and hopefully they get that aha moment. You're a genius. You're unbelievable. This is incredible. But
yeah. Well, every client is really its own thing, as you know. But I would say trust is the most important thing in that, because you got to understand, okay, what is this person asking me to do? Are they making all these suggestions because they feel uncomfortable with something? Are they interfering because they are worried? What are they worried about? And really pausing and acknowledging their reaction of, whether it's being controlling or like, hey, I want to see this sooner rather than later, or whatever they're coming out with, that you start to get a sense of like they're just not willing to like let you go and create and come back with something, which is understandable because, various people like to have various levels of input at various stages. And so first off, it's understanding what their desired level of engagement is, right? And it's like, hey, I like to be, and sometimes they can articulate it and sometimes they can't. Often they'll say things like, well, you're the creative person, I trust you. And that can be, a bit of a double-edged sword, because sometimes they, really, they mean well and they'd like to be able to trust, but they really don't. And so you kind of realize that through the iterative process. And then I think it's just really stopping to acknowledge who you're dealing with in that moment. Is this person that's telling me these things the same person that told me you're the creative person, run with it, or is this now a different person that I'm dealing with? Are they in a different headspace? And just acknowledging that and going, okay, how can I now provide you with what you're needing? In this moment, it seems like maybe you want me to show you 3 different options here live on the set versus me coming back to you with like the finished product. So, and it's just being responsive, I think, to that. And then ultimately over time, the first project is always the hardest. And then once you consistently produce, for someone, then they have greater and greater levels of trust. But you've got to go through the building trust phases, which usually involve work that's not approved. It involves work that they don't like. And so it's really how you deal with the failures that determines if you'll be able to move forward in the relationship. Because if at the end of the day they feel like you forced something on them, or that they're not happy with the product and they just kind of were stuck with it, then you can expect not to get repeat business. But at the end of the day, what they want is something that they can show their friends and show their peers and be like, this is a cool video that I have now about my brand. And if they don't get that, then that's really where, the loss is. And so it's really working with someone to a point where it's like, okay, we all feel good about this now. and really persevering through those things and not worrying so much about the contract and the budget and those things. It's more so going, okay, how do I get to a point of trust? Because once I get to a point of trust, it's really in the bag.
It's kind of interesting what you said there about that sort of situation where something is complete and it's shown to your client or your boss or whoever ordered it, and them getting excited.
Yeah.
And I feel like as we move into larger brands and start facilitating that experience, which is fuel for us too, starts to become less and less. Have you experienced that? Solo Stove has become a big brand. It's growing significantly, and you've had a lot to do with that. How that fuel for your client and that fuel for you, how do you find that excitability with a brand that is large? Here at Meticulous is, we'll work with brands and we'll create the video element of that, and typically speaking, we'll do a bit of work, and then that engine gets shut down, and we have the opportunity to kind of sit back and watch what we made and be like, this is great, and then we'll move on to the next thing, and so at that point we'll get sort of the fuel to create again and look back, in a retrospective manner, but I would imagine when you're tackling a large brand, and you're working with the internal team, and where do you get that fuel, or is there just no time to be, do you have to move on to the next creative challenge and be like, okay, we're good, done?
No, I think you always, it's a practice of looking for inspiration. I mean, you have to find inspiration, and that's really, I think, why the creative field is so challenging to maintain over long periods of time, because it's hard sometimes to come in and find that inspiration. But I will say, hands down, with D2C businesses, one of the most wonderful things you have is usually a plethora of customer feedback, customer testimonials, customer stories. And so I find that to be the most inspiring thing, when you see someone that's using this product and is making their life better. Then that's all I need. I'm like, all right, here's this great story of this person, whether it's like with Lectric E-Bikes, and they've gone out on an adventure, and at first when I was involved with the brand, I would see these pictures of the bike with this beautiful nature background, and there were no people in it. And so as a marketer, my immediate reaction was like, well, we need more pictures with people. And as I've come to appreciate the experience of using the product, I get it. You're out on a ride, and you're having this amazing feeling, and you're surrounded by nature, and you're having fun on this bike, and you just want to capture the moment, and you do that in the way that seems most natural to you, which is like, hey, this is, and then for some people that's, maybe that's a selfie, but I think for a lot of, Lectric customers, it's not. And so you just start to appreciate the nuances of the customer, and you appreciate them for who they are. And then that in itself is, for me, the people. With Solo Stove, same thing. You would see a family, around a fire, and it's not this refined, formal picture. It's the kids with messy hair, maybe a little marshmallow right here, and like it's the feet up, and it's the slippers, and it's a wonderful moment. It's just been like, I've got to share this. This is a special moment that I'm having right here, and you just capture it in that way. So when you're thinking about programmatic, when you're thinking about telling your brand story, when you're thinking about, hey, where are things at today from a technology standpoint, I say always go back to authenticity, because there's a reason why TikTok is as popular as it is. There's a reason why YouTube is as popular as it is, and that's because that's a place for you to tell your authentic story. It doesn't have to be refined. In fact, the more refined it is, the worse it performs. So bringing it back to that inspiration, that moment, and just keep, you keep finding that every day, and that's how you keep going, and that's how you keep bringing that wow factor to the work that you put out. And I think with a big brand, the bigger the brand is, the more, opportunities there are to get those stories and get those inspiration. And I think as you're planning out your messaging, it's really important to be strategic in defining value in the mind of the customer. And really your marketing calendar, your editorial calendar is defined by how do we want to build value in the mind of the customer, and that's where those stories come from. So if you've taken a moment to get inspiration about where your brand is going, then you know what those stories are, and you're looking for things to align with those values that you've defined. And so things kind of tend to marry up, and you go, okay, this customer story is really telling something that I think is key, for the brand experience. And you're able to, visualize that and make it a thing. And it can become all kinds of things. It can become a blog, it can become a video, it can become an ad, and then it's out there, and you hope people resonate with it.
Starting to run a little because you need to be out of here by 10, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just keeping being mindful of such. Let's jump down. You've been doing a lot of work recently at fostering brands involved in the D2C space and world. We had a B2C, business to consumer. We got B2B, business to business. Now we have D2C, direct to consumer. Go ahead and just define direct to consumer for anybody that is involved in the media creation space that might not understand that particular concept and how that might differ from, I don't know, the other.
Yeah. So you own your sales channels. So you have a website, that's essentially all it is that you, rather than going to some retail store and saying, hey, will you carry my product? that would be B2C. You have the ability to go direct to the consumer, where it's selling on a website or selling in your own, storefront that's your dedicated storefront. That's also direct to consumer. You're selling, there's no middleman, so you don't have to account from a business model standpoint that, minimum 40%, margin that you need to be able to sell in a retail store, or to a retail store rather. You can cut the cost to the customer, and that's really, I think, the heart of the model.
Well, pertaining to developing a brand that is D2C, communities are incredibly important. What's it like developing communities for a large brand like Lectric or Solo that are D2C? How do you flex what you have known and learned throughout the years to foster a community?
Yeah. So with those brands, they both did a very good job of building community prior to me even being a part of things. That's really how they became such strong D2C brands, is because they started with community in mind. Jeff and Spencer Jan, when they started Solo Stove, were posting in camping forums, about the light, model, and they were talking about how it works, and they were taking the time to build that community. And so, it kind of built through the camping community, who then just requested bigger and bigger versions of of the little stove, and became, a fire pit company. And from there, making content available on platforms is what makes people want to share. And so I think you've got to have regular posting. That's a non-negotiable. You have to have content coming out all the time, email, social, everywhere, TV, anything you can get. And with Lectric, it's very much the same idea as far as having built a community. Lectric started with the RV community. Their very first model was successful with the RV community. And so, you see, a bike as you're camping in an RV park, and someone, stops and talks to you about it, and the word just kind of spread like wildfire. So community is central. It's very difficult to start a brand, a D2C brand, without a focus on community. You almost have to have a niche in the world, a set of people that are your people. And I think the best way to find that set of people is to really be true to yourself, to not be concerned about your competition, to not be concerned about what is it thinking of you, but just to really define who am I as a brand, why do I need to be here as a brand, and then just go out into the world with those values, and your people will find you. They'll resonate with you, and they'll go and share. You can't help but share a great experience.
A big part of this podcast is sort of a discussions and celebrations of media creators, those responsible for fostering media. Over the course of your career, you have worked with some very talented photographers. And is there anyone in particular that you would like to give props to, that you've worked with, and yeah, I don't know, give them a little love?
A little love. Well, when I started my consulting business prior to being with Lectric, I think I called on you guys a lot because
shucks.
So I can't help but give you a little bit of props.
Thank
because
you.
You were flexible enough to work with me when I was starting my business. I didn't have anything figured out the first time I had done consulting, and so I think you guys really were able to work with me and work with the clients I was working with and meet what I needed to meet in that moment, from a pricing standpoint and from a quality deliverable standpoint. So I would start with you. If you want me to throw in someone else there just for posterity, the person that comes to mind at the moment is, from a photographer standpoint specifically, is John Thompson. He was a very talented food photographer that I worked with at United Supermarkets. And, I was in my early 30s when I was working with him, and we had to do this really awesome catering catalog. It was our assignment. And up until that point, I pretty much insisted that everything I shot would be shot outdoors because I just loved natural lighting and things. And he said, well, you can't take food outside, it'll ruin. And I was like, well, how are we going to get this look? And I showed him all these shots that I'm just like, this is what it needs to look like. He's like, oh, I can recreate that. And I'm like, no. Sure enough, we would get in a studio, and he was just this magician with light. I don't know if he's still working today. I know he retired from United some time ago. But I think what I learned from him most is that you can't overestimate the value of having a very sound technical expertise, because I think that the tendency of creatives nowadays is to just learn more and more stuff, and like I want to be able to do all these things, and then in that they lose their craft a bit. Having a very, very strong technical skill set and paying attention to those small details is what makes great creative, and I think that's really what when I'm guiding and training my team today. It's training them to have an eye for very, very small things that they go, oh, you know what, that did make it better, and that's really where I think a lot of it may get lost, if we let AI take over too much. We need to be able to have that strong foundation and know our core competencies and be strong in our technical skill set.
That was a pretty fantastic way to cap off the podcast.
Thanks.
But let's just a quick notation. Your thoughts on the future, perhaps with Lectric, your own career. Give us some aspirational goals for your life and your career.
Yeah. Well, I would say, given my age and given where things are at, I would put myself in a bit of a flux right now. But some things I aspire to do, I kind of see my life in sections. I've been in this really awesome creative section, and I want to share as much of that wisdom as I can going forward. But I definitely see kind of like a farming phase in my life, and then I think that will be followed by like a fishing phase.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting.
Maybe we'll mix in with some, some branding and some consulting. But I am really having a great time with Lectric E-Bikes right now, and I think that ride will carry on for a little bit longer here. But in the not too distant future, I'd like to have a little patch of ground.
Well, I'll say on the electric e-bikes front and the work that Meticulous has done with you and them, that is quite a fun vehicle.
Isn't it?
Well, like literally, but also just like metaphorically, just a fun space to play around in. And very much a growing space in terms of the product.
Just barely scratched the surface. I mean, there's about 40 to 50% of bikes sold in Europe are e-bikes versus about 6 here in the U.S. So there's plenty of room for plenty of players. E-bikes are a great way to get around, and I think Lectric wants to change the way people move, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for that given the rising cost of things, and the fact that it's just better for you and better for the environment to kind of be out on a bike. So, I
was in Italy a few weeks ago. It was just a solo photography trip, just
nice.
A little time to myself. Those are the best. I love just hanging out by myself, me, myself, and I. And I had a conference call I had to get to. It was happening here at an appropriate time. However, in Rome, it was not ideal, and it was downpouring rain, and I couldn't get an Uber or a cab. So what did I do? I jumped on an e-bike.
Perfect.
It was brilliant. And I was soaking wet by the time I got to my hotel to sit down for the Zoom chat. But that e-bike saved the day. So
nice.
Very exciting space that you're working in. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. And on IKAG, now a VP of brand, Cristy Hatter. Thanks.
Nice to meet you.